Okay. My name is Aamer Anwar. I'm the lead solicitor for the Scottish Covid Bereaved. Myself and a number of groups and organisations will be doing a short statement and then be questions and answers. Across the United Kingdom, many will have watched the evidence of Boris Johnson today. He was the Prime Minister that presided over the meltdown of the British state alongside a chaotic and dysfunctional number 10. Mr Johnson apologised today, but that apology is not accepted by many of the bereaved because he also claimed his government saved thousands of lives, and that for many is a grotesque distortion of the truth. Instead of solving a national crisis, Boris Johnson, in his own words, presided over a total, disgusting orgy of narcissism. Millions of frontline workers risked their lives without adequate PPE. Johnson's government turned our care homes into killing grounds for the elderly who were treated as toxic waste. He wasted £37 billion on a failed track and trace system, and all the while Johnson and his cabinet were living it up at parties, insulting the dead, the poor and the vulnerable. Mr Johnson tried his very best to deny his government's failings meant that the UK had one of the highest COVID death rates of all major economies, but that is the evidence. He was dismissive of WhatsApps, but he was accused by senior members of his own government, of his own inner circle, of saying, let the bodies pile up rather than have another lockdown. Johnson's excuse today is that his government was slow to understand the severity of COVID, but insisted that he got the big calls right. However, on the biggest life-saving decision of lockdowns, on each and every occasion, Boris Johnson delayed and sided with death. The voice of the voiceless will be heard. The bereaved and all those impacted by COVID, at the very least, deserve the truth from Mr Johnson. Anna Louise Marsh-Rees from the Covid Bereaved Cymru Group.
Thank you. It's very surreal to be standing here today, 3 years after my father died, and listening to the man that made the decisions that led to so many deaths. We all knew he was disorganised and disdainful, but had no idea, and I'm going to use some C words here, but not out of the Dominic Cummings lexicon, but I wasn't aware how casual, careless, chaotic, clueless he was, but sadly not competent, and without conscience, and 100% not contrite. Very interesting that one of his biggest issues was dealing with the devolved nations. He said Scotland or whoever. As someone that leads the Welsh group, we assume that means Wales and Northern Ireland. It just feels like he was living under a rock. How could we all know what was going on in China and Italy, and he was just completely unaware of it? I mean, if the chair needs a recommendation, I'd say if you're going to be PM, there needs to be some kind of exam to do it, and it needs to include a memory test. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalise.
Hi. It's not just lives that would have been saved if we'd locked down sooner. If the government had been competent, many of the millions of people who are still suffering from ongoing symptoms from a COVID-19 infection back in March 2020 would not have had their lives ruined. Johnson talked about communication as being one of the most important NPIs to stop the spread of the virus. The government has failed to communicate about long COVID throughout the inquiry. It has been sidelined. The communication would have helped people prevent people from dying as well as getting long COVID, because people would have taken personal protective measures. It's really, really disappointing that even though ministers try to bring the fact of long COVID to the Prime Minister's notice, he was clearly sceptical and was unable to take it on board, was unable to take it seriously, and as a result, nearly 3% of the UK population is now impacted by ongoing symptoms, and many of them cannot work and cannot contribute to the economy, which was always prioritised over health.
Thank you. If there's any questions, could you identify yourself and then...
Mr. Anwar, Tom Sheldon from ITV Border. Can I ask your reaction to what you've heard this morning from Mr. Johnson on behalf of the Covid Bereaved group in Scotland?
It's sadly as was expected. It would appear that those acting for Mr. Johnson or others who have special interests have tried to defend Mr. Johnson over the last few days. So it was entirely predictable. He issued an apology, but he caveated by saying that he got the big calls right. How do you get the big calls right when we had one of the highest rates of death within Western Europe or out of any of the major economies? How do you get the big decisions right when you waste £37 billion on test and trace system that doesn't work? How do you get it right when actually our frontline workers lost their lives, are suffering from long COVID as a failure to deliver PPE? He didn't get the big decisions right. He's trying to blame everyone else. He has failed to take responsibility, and he must account for his actions. His words today, as far as the bereaved that we've spoken to, are insulting to the memory of the bereaved. He needs to tell the truth. He needs to account for his actions. This is his people, his people's emails, his people's WhatsApps that have spoken up about his attitude, his disgraceful attitude, his insulting attitude to the vulnerable, to the poor, to the ill, to the elderly in this country. The elderly were treated as toxic waste. They should not have been left to die, often on their own in care homes, being discharged into care homes. Speak up, Glenn, sorry.
Do you accept the argument from Boris Johnson that there was mixed messaging across the UK and that was a problem?
Well, the issue isn't really one, and I'll let other people come in. This issue is not really the question of mixed messaging. He is the Prime Minister at the time. He has the Cabinet Office, he has the Cabinet members, he has the Chief Scientific Advisors, he has the Chief Medical Officers, he has the World Health Organization. He has everyone feeding information to him. Over that period of 10 days, introduce the lockdown or thousands will die. Why did he not act? Why did he disappear? He has tried to model himself, as I understand, on Winston Churchill, his great hero. But Winston Churchill would not have disappeared for 10 days during the Battle of Britain. I suspect he would have stayed in post and would have fought on. Boris Johnson disappeared. He failed on each and every occasion to take the decisions that mattered. He had the advice, they told him to act. This wasn't a case of there was mixed messaging across the United Kingdom. He holds the responsibility. He's the one who had the levers of power.
And if I may just ask Alan,